Right. Well, welcome everyone. Yes, I think everyone can hear and see. Yes, great chance in business will should the value of in person for that business. All right. Welcome today to the public forum on draft decision folder. My name is Simon, so I'm here to check it. Just to let you know, you get to the other things this morning is that one is being recorded to ensure access to those who have been able to attend the first time. So just be aware that any statement, comment, question you make, which meant to make available the website. To start, each distribution owners. I would also invite to from each distribution owners the land orders. All right, well, thanks very much for taking the time to be here this afternoon. I'd just like to introduce who is in the room today. The commission to start with. We've got our executive director of regulation. I've got a number of members available to team for the commission as well. I know there's a lot of people from a range of different stakeholder interests. I think we have people from Coliban Water done as well. I think we've got representatives from the development and property industry. I understand there are those from local council areas. I think we've also got a representative from the media as well, so just to let everyone know in the room. And there's probably a host of other representatives here today, so thanks very much for making the time. From Coliban Water, to welcome Damien Weeks, and there's a range of other executives who are as well, so thank you. Great. All right, just some housekeeping. I think slide on this as well. We do have a hybrid meeting. So if you've got any questions or comments to make while someone's talking today, if you're online, feel free to type them into the chat so we can look at the discussion. Please keep your microphone muted and don't try to speak to avoid feedback and background noise when you're unmuted. But for those in the room too, please feel free to comment query. And we'll come to you in the time's right meeting. But in addition to participation today, I just wanted to give a reminder too about the other ways to provide feedback, and that's via the Engage Victoria website. You can engage with us in other ways too, so please feel free to. Is this not working? It's not. I'll be going. Just on that then goes on. Point, thumbs up. So just to recap, just in terms of engaging with us, the team will put online the Engage Victoria website to be able to give us further written submissions. If you do want to engage with us another way, please reach out to the team. We can facilitate that as well. I think the web address for Engage Victoria is also on the slides and the website as well. Well, just the purpose and agenda for today. What I'd like to do is use the first part of today's forum just to give a brief introduction about the Essential Services Commission's role in price regulation. But always the main purpose of these sorts of events is to hear directly from you and answer any questions you might have about this. To help shape today's discussion, we'll cover off on how we assess the price submission from Coliban Water and our draft decision. Coliban Water by Damien Wells then have the opportunity to respond to our draft decision, and then we have the opportunity hopefully to hear from you those questions and feedback. As always, really appreciate having the opportunity to hear directly from stakeholders in person. It's particularly fantastic after the last few years, and insights from these sorts of engagements really help us to shape where we move from draft decision to final decision. With that in mind, I think what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about us. So we regulate Victoria's energy, water and transport sectors. We oversee the fair low rate system. We also do the returning pathways program. We have been regulating water prices for more than 20 years. For the water sector, we approve prices and service standards, monitor and report on performance, and we administer customer service codes. And what we're currently doing is reviewing new water prices to apply from the 1st of July 2023. Okay, that's been policy for 14 businesses in Victoria. And those businesses we approved collecting 7% of the efficient costs water businesses need to recover and to provide free services. That helps us in. So final consultation, we will issue a determination that sets the maximum prices that Coliban Water charge its customers. Now, how we assess the price submission and our draft decision, I'm going to hand over to Marcus Crudden, and who will step us through how we did that. I'll come back then and introduce Damien, and then after that we will have a hopefully very fruitful Q&A session. So thanks, Marcus. I need that to so I might turn that on.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for coming. So, what we want to give now is just a bit of an overview about how we assess Coliban's price decision. What we're required to do with the price submission is assess it against what's known as the Water Industry Regulatory Order that sets out the rules we need to have regard to, but also that Coliban needs to have regard to in assessing. So, we're an independent economic regulator. Those rules are set out by the Victorian government, and they're the rules that we need to follow. But we also need to ensure that the price submission meets the requirements of our guidance. That includes our expectation around the overall approach. We also have an incentive framework known as the Primo framework, where extra returns are earned based on the level of ambition within the price submission. We also need to ensure that the price submission complies with relevant criteria under the Water Industry Act and the Essential Services Commission Act. So there's a range of criteria which the assessment needs to be made. It's also important to understand that the assessment is of the price submission put to us by Coliban Water. We don't get to second guess it. It's, in many respects, Coliban Water leads the dance. So they get to put a submission before us and we have to check it off against those rules and those criteria. We don't get to kind of put forward alternative projects or ideas. It's really the assessment about whether the criteria and the guidance is being complied with, and then it will be approved. So it's really up to Coliban to put it forward. In our draft decision, we indicate where we propose to approve or not approve. Again, that's a legal framework that we either approve things, and where we don't approve, we in approval. Steps between a final. Approved. So we're not actually approving the work plan of Coliban, that there will be things that there'll be flexibility way on the best available information at the time. Coliban's put forward a fairly large capital works program. It's really up to them to manage and prioritise, and if things emerge during the period, it's really Damien and his team are responsible for delivering and implementing that decision. It's not a tick of approval about individual projects or individual objectives, and indeed some things are sometimes taken out of a price decision. Similarly, and not saying you can't do them, it's saying whether it's appropriate to include them for pricing purposes at this point in time. Next slide. Now, we've got a draft decision out, and that's what we're consulting on today. We're wanting written submissions by the 12th of May, and prices will take effect 1st of July from next year. So we're 3/4 of the way through the process. This is an important part, that the draft are where things are put out, and that opportunity for customers, community, others to respond and understand our reasoning or raise any concerns with the proposal. It's a chance also for Coliban to respond to the issues we've raised in our draft by clarifying, providing further information or justification for things they've put forward. And Damien will sort of respond initially to our draft today. How we look at it, we assess the engagement that Coliban's undertaken and how they've interacted with customers and community in developing. I think we've generally found that's actually been a real strength of this submission, that there has been a fairly extensive engagement, notwithstanding I know some in the development community have some concerns, but I think across the broad customer base there's been a strong engagement undertaken and a fairly significant and prolonged set of engagement with customers and community. We test expenditure and demand forecasts. We verify supporting assumptions and data, so beyond the price submission. Damien and his team have had lots of follow-up requests for further information, underpinning reports, data, assumptions. We check all those. We evaluate how it manages risk and how it's performed over the current period. So under the Primo framework, this is the first time that the performance element has been assessed, that it wasn't previously assessed. We review the OPEX and CAPEX costings and timing assumptions to ensure that they were reasonable. We obtained sort of independent arm's length advice around that, but those that have read Coliban's submission will know there's a very big, very ambitious capital program, but our consultants have actually reviewed that and given a fairly strong endorsement that the program is deliverable and well costed. So that was a significant achievement by Coliban. So next. In terms of our draft decision, we've accepted the 5-year regulatory period put forward. We propose to accept many elements, tariff structures and form of price control. We've adopted a sort of revenue requirement of 727 million over the 5 years, so it's quite significant expenditure by Coliban over each year of that period. We have asked Coliban to address our further reviews and forecast regulatory depreciation. I think David will respond to that today. We've updated proposed prices to reflect some changes to the revenue requirement. There were some minor changes to OPEX and CAPEX we'll come to. We've asked them to consider the relatively high inflation on proposed prices and customer bills. As you're aware, the March quarter inflation, which is the one used for price setting, was released last week at 7%. So Coliban's prices are sort of 2% above that next year. We've asked for further information on new customer contributions, particularly around the allocations of the capital expenditure within that. I think you've addressed some of that today, Damien. I know a number of developers are here today. Probably have some questions for Coliban around that, and how we transition over time. So next slide. So at the moment, we're sort of looking at a bill for next year being around the $1,491 once that inflation figure is added. Coliban is at the higher end of bills, and it is one of the higher price rises. Hence, why there's probably a fair bit of scrutiny of the proposal. At this stage, we've sort of endorsed it, but have asked them to consider some matters, whether there'll be any changes to that. But we do recognise in the current economic circumstances that is a significant bill and a significant increase. Coliban, as part of their proposal, has proposed a fairly extensive program of customer assistance and expanding on the existing assistance in recognition of that high bill and the impact that potentially has on customers and community. I think Damien will talk to that in his presentation. I think probably the business are very happy to answer any questions about how it will be dealing with the impact of those bills. So we do recognise that they are significant, but we do acknowledge Coliban has made efforts to ameliorate the impacts of those and with expansions of those assistance programs. So, as said, there's relatively small adjustments to operating and capital expenditure. So while there are some, they're pretty small in the scheme of things, and the overall program has largely been signed off by us and our consultants, which is probably a significant achievement by Coliban, given the size of the program and the works it's undertaken. We do acknowledge there's been a lot of work by the business to justify that capital program, and a lot of sort of arm's length work by themselves to present it to us to demonstrate they'd thought about it. And we do recognise it's probably the biggest spend Coliban's had in its history. It really is a large program. So Damien will no doubt talk a bit to that and the priorities within it. Now, this just does show the capital forecast. We see in this period we're tracking fairly well. The last year or so, things have gone up. That was something Coliban during the period that Damien that did come and say they were going to expand the capital program, given the things that were coming. It's also been pretty consistent across all water businesses that capital expenditure is up, that input costs faced by water businesses have risen fairly significantly over the last couple of years. So capital programs, just on a like-with-like basis, are. You will also see from that compared to where the business thought capital would be over the coming 5 years when prices were set 5 years ago. This is a far bigger program. It's probably about double what was anticipated 5 years back over the next 5 years. And I think Damien will talk particularly about what have been some of the environmental and particularly the sewage side of the business is driving a lot of that. Next slide. Operating expenditure is similar been up. That is one area we did express a bit of concern within the price decision, particularly. Again, it's a similar pattern that across the state operating expenditures have tended to be more than forecast 5 years ago. We have had a very unusual period, obviously with the pandemic and the input that's had on projects and costs, and there has been some significant rises. Coliban does have one of the larger rises though, so it is something we have made comment on in our draft decision. And I think it is really important with those rising bills that there is strong cost control within the business. Next slide, Lucy. But overall, under the Primo framework, they operated as standard. We've endorsed that rating, so we have considered Coliban met expectations over the last 5 years. Its engagement program has been very good. It's one of the best undertaken across the state, so we do acknowledge that. Its proposed outcome measures have been developed in consultation with customers and community, so we're approving them. There have been improvements in customer value over time. We have expressed though concern about the allocation of risk, particularly this issue about the regulatory depreciation period, which is significantly shorter than other water businesses. And that may mean customers could pay more than they need to. We've also raised some concerns about whether enough information has been presented to sufficiently justify the cost allocation approaches under the new customer contribution. So they're perhaps the two areas of concern we're really expecting Coliban to respond to. I think Damien will be responding to some of those issues today, and I'm sure there'll be a full written account of those on the 12th of May, but also welcome input from those here today on your views on those issues, and particularly from the development community about issues associated with the new customer contributions. Under our draft decision, it does mean prices will increase in real terms, which is before inflation. With inflation, the price rises will be significant, so we're not pretending there's not a significant price rise with the community here. Customers will continue to receive high quality water, sewage treatment, disposal of waste, and significant new investments in waterways. As I said, this is a very big investment program, really bringing particularly the sewage side of the business up to scratch. So there are certainly significant improvements for the environment out of this. Coliban will continue to reduce its environmental footprint. Like all water businesses, Coliban will be moving to 100% renewable energy by 2025, and we'll be progressing, I guess, on a journey to net zero emissions over this and the next period. So there's significant commitments for the environmental side as well. And as I said, there is that increased support for customers experiencing financial payment difficulties as well. So that's it from me. So I'll hand over to Damien Wells, Managing Director of Coliban, to give Coliban's initial response to our draft decision, and then after that we'll take questions either of the Commissioner of Coliban Water. So thanks for that.
Thanks very much, Marcus. Appreciate your comments and your feedback. Thanks, Kate and Marcus, for the opportunity. I think it's a great democratic process to be here, and for us rightly to have the blowtorch of scrutiny applied on us, and for people to see that we're more than happy for that to occur, and what our response is. So thanks for the opportunity. Also want to acknowledge at the outset that we're meeting on Jarrah country. I'd like to pay my respects, Rodney, to elders past and present. I want to acknowledge you here today as the CEO of the Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Aboriginal Corporation, and all the work that you do as the key regional leader for Jarrah, and the work that you play on a bigger stage than your traditional lands alone for Victoria more significantly. So thank you, Rodney, for attending today, and thank you for the role you played in our process to develop our proposal. We've got there's 4 traditional owner groups across the Coliban Water service region. I mentioned Jar, but also Yorta, Barappa, and Whangarang country. This picture is we did a cultural immersion with Jar. This is Beck Phillips from Rodney's group, and this is our directors who did that cultural immersion as we seek to continue to be educated and learn more and embed traditional owner values and aspirations in our business. Maybe next one, please. So our core business, you would think this is pretty obvious, but there's nothing like the discipline of actually articulating what your core business is. We've said that it's providing safe drinking water, recycled water, sewage and rural water services for public health and the environment so that our communities can sustain themselves. Might seem really obvious to everybody here, but sometimes things become obvious once you actually say them. So that really guided where we needed to prioritise our investment over the coming 5 years. So our operating context. So climate change, ageing assets, and population growth are the 3 really big drivers we called out in our pricing submission. We need to front up to these big drivers. Climate change impact isn't something in the future, it's something that we're really feeling now. We've already experienced a 53% reduction in inflows to our Upper Coliban storages, so that is biting. People who were around for the Millennium Drought know that ultimately that required the massive investment in the Goldfield Super Pipe acquisition of water rights from the Goulburn system in order to support our region in terms of absolute basic water security, where Bendigo was within 5 weeks of effectively running out of drinking water. Our sewer assets are in need of a big investment. Marcus nailed all the key issues. We do have to front up to some significant EPA non-compliance. We were prosecuted in Kyneton off the back of the 2019 licence breach in Kyneton for a discharge that ultimately the Kyneton Magistrates Court imposed $150,000 penalty on Coliban Water, and also put us on a 2-year good behaviour bond with the courts, which has recently expired as we've navigated effectively that good behaviour bond, which was very reputationally damaging, and it was something that we don't stand for. What we stand for is really great environmental outcomes. We want to play a regenerative role for the condition of our catchments. Ageing assets, I mentioned. We need to renew a lot of our existing large assets, the Bendigo Water Reclamation Plant, the Castlemaine Water Reclamation Plant, the Kierina Water Reclamation Plant. We've got pipes under Bendigo from 1893. We have to renew these significant underground assets. The possible consequence, and we've experienced some of this already, it's already risks being realised, that there's a high consequence of those asset failures and also undersized networks. Growth, COVID has seen some acceleration of people moving to regional Victoria, and of course, why wouldn't they? But if the colder corridor towns, obviously Bendigo itself, also the Murray River towns, there's a fair bit of growth happening in our region, and thanks for our colleagues from City Go to Bendigo for attending. Some of those figures producing through the managed growth strategy show that the forecast is for growth to continue, particularly at a large scale in Bendigo, that in all of in the vast majority of the 49 towns that we serve. So we're really focused on how do we navigate that whilst remaining financially sustainable. We're here for our customers. We're 100% customer funded. So our debt to customer that's a metric that we often look across, and I'll talk a bit about that today. One of the things we're mindful of is that we are on a trajectory to exceed something like $1 billion debt by 2033. So we have a great responsibility in being financially disciplined as we execute services for customers. Next one, please. Sustainability for our customers. This is what it's all about. I've mentioned the environmental and service failures that we're at risk of, and we have had some of those be realised. We necessarily have a significant capital expenditure program. We do need to propose a modest increase in customer bills in order to fund this, but we are funding the vast majority of our capital program through debt. And this is the balancing act. And what we asked our deliberative panel is, how do you navigate intergenerational equity? What's reasonable to pay for customers to pay today? And what's reasonable for customers to pay into the future? Operational investment, Marcus mentioned that that is ticking up across the state, and I think obviously everyone's acutely aware of the impacts of inflation that are flowing through the general economy, and of course Coliban Water is not immune from those impacts. So what we proposed was a 1.9%, so 1.9% it is plus inflation price rise for the first 2 years of the regulatory period and the back end process, and this was about phasing in a modest price rise of 2.5% in the back 3 years. And in order to come up with that, we pushed our financial risk appetite to the absolute limit. There was no more blood to get out of the stone, if I can speak with that language, in the sense of we pushed the model absolutely to its limits. We had our directors literally up to an Excel spreadsheet in the boardroom, playing with the numbers and looking at risk appetite to see how far we could push the model to absolutely minimise the flow through in terms of customer bills. We mentioned new customer contributions, and I acknowledge many of the development community here today. You play a really important role to support that growth in our region. One of the focuses has been to ensure that our existing customers are not cross-subsidising development costs, and so we know there's been some concerns raised with some of the proposal. We know we've also been engaging with you. We'll continue to engage with you over the course of this week and beyond. And we accept all of the comments, Marcus and Kate, in good faith as they've been provided in the draft decision. I just mentioned this capital expenditure. So one of the things Marcus mentioned was deliverability. We've promised our customers that we will get on top of the quality of our assets so that we can ensure public health and environment protection. To do that, we need to invest in our capital program. We need to be able to do that in a way that that we can, genuinely demonstrate we can deliver the work. We see many projects fall behind. Marcus has indicated through our initial engagements over the recent years, where he's seen, different players come unstuck over the years in terms of deliverability. So we put a lot of effort into transforming Coliban Water so that we can deliver the capital program that we're proposing. Notwithstanding, we're staring into those construction inflationary pressures and scarce talent as well that we'll need to navigate. The point of this slide is really to show that we're coming off a low base, so a statutory asset base of nearly $2 billion, and we've only really been investing about $40 million in our capital program, which I describe as barely keeping the lights on. And what happens is the quality of your assets gets away from you, and then you need to invest. And that's what we're proposing to do, which is to invest into our assets. Next one, please. We put a huge amount of effort, and thank you, Marcus, for acknowledging the effort that we put into our customer engagement. For the first time, Coliban ran a deliberative panel. Up on the top left, there is a photo of our deliberative panel. Obviously, a fair bit of that happened through COVID. Again, acknowledge you, Rodney. Rodney helped us produce a whole series of videos to give his perspective for our deliberative panel to consider as they made their decisions about balancing intergenerational equity. And so it was the deliberative panel. It was a whole bunch of customer data, but also targeted stakeholder engagement. And that was the question we asked: how do we prepare for tomorrow while being fair to customers today? And that was an independently facilitated process. And ultimately, that deliberative panel generated 9 recommendations that was considered by Coliban Water, the Coliban Water Board. And I acknowledge at this point, Bob Cameron, our chairman, is online. I believe Lucy Rock is online as well. Nigel McGuckian and Marika McMahon in the room as well, directors of Coliban Water. And also our executive team is largely in attendance as well. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. Now, we recognise that in terms of the role we hold in the community, underpinning our community, in proposing a modest increase to customer bills, we really had to make sure that no one was left behind. I want to acknowledge Troy West from the Salvation Army. Thanks, Troy. Troy's been involved in our process as well. And and we take advice and guidance from people such as Troy as to how we can make sure we're supporting people that are experiencing vulnerability in our community. And the deliberative panel from the community, they propose that we should double the size of our what we call our Coliban Assist program, so that no customers are left behind, and so that we can ensure everyone who needs help at a point in time when they experience it can get the help they need. So there's a whole bunch of different assistance types available. Sometimes it's extensions on payment, it's payment plans, concessions, discounts. We've got a community rebate program. We've got our staff trained up to detect, in some of the cases, people who are experiencing violence in the home. And we've got a whole referrals process in terms of financial counselling. So one of the other things I'm mindful of is that you get a quarterly bill. Quarterly bills, be better if people got a monthly bill. I think it's at the household level, I think it's better for cash flow if you can get a monthly bill. So we've recently implemented a new customer billing system. We've also rolling out digital meters. We've done those everywhere across our region with the exception of Bendigo, which we're rolling out at the moment. Those digital meters will be able to support a monthly billing process. So we'll no longer have to have people boots on the ground reading meters, which is something that you couldn't do monthly. It's not economically sensible to do that monthly, but with digital meters, that information comes in and we could issue email bills on a monthly basis. We think that's a good initiative. We've got more back of house work to make that happen. That's not something that's going to happen from day one in this proposal, but it's something that we'll be pursuing over the life of the next 5 years. Next one, please. So Marcus summarised all of this. I won't repeat it. I'll actually probably more get to what we're saying in terms of a response. Some of these issues are more material than others, as Marcus said, and I'm just calling out, and we agree with your comment, Marcus, that's really the regulatory depreciation and the new customer contributions are probably the big ones that you've raised in the draft decision, and that's what we're throwing a heap of effort at the moment to respond to. So I'll just talk through some of the implications. I'll just mention this figure here, regulatory depreciation, which is something probably takes an afternoon to explain how it all works. And I certainly don't proclaim to be an expert other than to say that regulatory depreciation in the regulatory asset-based model that is governed under the Primo approach administered by the ESC, the pricing that falls out of the model is quite sensitive to regulatory depreciation. And so that figure is something that previously we had proposed and ESC accepted, a 16-year regulatory depreciation. That was in an environment where prices were going down. We've proposed that same figure and concerns have been raised, and I think the comment is to either justify 16 or look at adopting something much closer to 30 years. We've got some concerns about if we were required to adopt 30 years, what that means for our financial health. So I'll get through that. And also I'm mindful with many of the development community here in the room. We've got some comments and got some work to do to continue engagement on new customer contributions. So if we go to that next slide. So just one of the key things about Coliban Water that we're seeking to communicate and continue to build understanding is in relation to our debt position. So over the life of the coming 5 years, there'll be about $1 billion invested in water services and infrastructure. 800 million will be recovered through customer bills. So that's part funding the capital program and funding operations. We're borrowing another 350 million, which will take us out to about $800 million of debt by 2028. Now, that's a pretty eye-watering figure for the uninitiated, but obviously through the pricing model, the idea is that you invest in assets today, but over the life of the asset, you recover the cost of that asset from customers as they enjoy the benefits of those assets. So that's about borrow today, repay over time. And that's the model. And we're mindful of that, but we're also mindful that we already hold significant debt and we're trying to make sure we can remain financially healthy for the long run benefit of our customers and our community. If we were to adopt a 30-year regulatory depreciation figure, we actually go to about $900 million debt instead of 800. We're incurring $175 million of interest repayments while debt levels still increase. So we're certainly by no means proposing that we recover the vast majority of capital through price. That's actually not what we're proposing. We're proposing that the majority of capital be funded through borrowings. And if we adopt the 30-year regulatory depreciation, basically that means yearly a $200 million expenditure on servicing debt. So that's when I said directors pushed our financial risk appetite to the limit. These are the kinds of things that I'm talking about. So go to the next one, please. So debt per customer. So this is some of our peer organisations across Victoria. So at the outset, we hold about $6,000 debt per customer. That's the debt that we're servicing day in, day out. Now, we've said we will continue to take on debt as the model requires us to do to invest in the capital that's required. So that will increase. That's the yellow figure. Now, if that's under our proposal, if we were to adopt, and we acknowledge, Marcus and Kate, that the recommendation in the draft decision is to either justify the 16 or to adopt something closer to 30, it does actually see us go to something like $10,000 of debt to customer ratio. That's something we're concerned about. That's something that we think pushes the financial health of the business into an unhealthy place. You can see that relative to our many of our peers, we start off from a higher debt position. So just go to the next. So again, just thinking about customer bills and pricing, this regulatory depreciation, and I apologise in advance if your eyeballs are rolling into the back of your head when I say regulatory depreciation. I'm sorry that that's the case. It's something we need to respond to in good faith in this pricing decision, but I don't for 1 second assume that everyone understands regulatory depreciation because there's a whole technical aspect sitting behind it. But the point I need to make is that we have been decreasing Coliban Water customer bills over the past recent period. So say if you look at this is real terms, so this is excluding inflation. Coliban customer bills have been decreasing from 2017 onwards, and the dotted line up the top is if we continued pricing at CPI, so at inflation, that's about where customer bills would be. This green line is the price path that we're proposing, which is 1.9%, 1.9%, and 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. That would recover us to about where bills would have been if we continued at CPI from about 2017. So just trying to provide some context. Now, the other bit of this revenue gap, if we are to adopt, for example, a 30-year regulatory depreciation number, then that would have us require, under the way the model works, we would have to drop prices. Now, if you drop prices, you're recovering less from customers, and this intergenerational equity question comes into play. So then we would need to borrow more in the next 5 years, and future generations would have to pay that debt back in the future. So, and that when I talk about the possible price drop, it would be something like call it 6%. And I'll just say why that's important in the next slide. We're concerned that under that proposal, if we were to adopt 30 years, that we would be sent into red territory among agreed financial indicators of health. So internal financing. So internal financing is how much of your capital program you fund through debt versus how much of your capital program you fund through customer prices. And so that would have us dip down into nearly something like 85% of our program being funded through debt in terms of our capital program. So that's taking on more debt when we're already in one of the most indebted positions across our peer group. Interest cover is a widely accepted financial metric. We think in a business like a water corporation, where we've had in the past 12, 13 years, you've had the millennium drought, then you had a record-breaking flood in 2011, then you've had a period of maybe a little bit of Goldilocks. There's a fire and a few things in there. But then last year we had the biggest floods again in living memory that exceeded the previous biggest floods in living memory in many of our catchments. So the purple line on that interest cover sees us dip well down into amber and into red under a 30-year reg depreciation. We're already reasonably geared, as I mentioned, in terms of our economic gearing, debt to RAB. And again, I apologise for tech babble, but I have to address the concerns that have been raised in the draft decision. In terms of net operating cash flow to net debt, well, we live in the red already, and we basically, our position further deteriorates under that proposal. So these are our fundamental concerns and concerns that our directors have from a fiduciary responsibility perspective. Directors appointed by the minister to be the stewards for a point in time, like a managing director. We are just here for a blip in time as a custodian of this service for our community. We're concerned that this would leave us in territory that future generations would be frowning upon us. Next slide, please. New customer contributions. Now, we think we did a pretty reasonable job of the engagement. Now, not everyone in the room may agree with us on the new customer contributions implementation. However, fundamentally, we accept the comments in good faith in draft decision about some of the ideas and for us to explore. We've proposed a new model relative to what we currently adopt. And Marcus and the team have definitely raised some concerns. We met with Marcus the other day and he articulated and detailed some of his concerns. So we're fully accepting those on good faith. And we will pursue further engagement this week with the development community. Now, I've detailed some of the engagement down the side, and this isn't for me to sound defensive whatsoever. All we want to do is work through a process so that the development community can accept a way forward and that we can justify to every other customer that they are not cross-subsidising development in our community. That's basically the core premise of where we need to get to. So we're not welded on or wedded to anything. We're happy to get out and put everything that we need to on the table. From the engagement already to date, there's been a fair bit of change that we've driven off the back of recommendations, and some of those are in those dot points, which is discontinuation of low growth town discount, phasing in, the shared sewer pump station issue, which is always a challenge to navigate, rebates for those private sewer pumps, whole bunch of things that we feel that we've responded to, but we're happy to keep that conversation going. And again, actually, we'll just go to that next slide. One of the challenges in working through with growth in place where the majority of our growth in absolute numbers is in Bendigo. So here's the Bendigo water treatment plant, and the orange is the water reclamation plant. Obviously, Bendigo is a city in the forest, and a lot of our larger development is happening on the edge of the urban growth boundary. So obviously, to service that, it requires network investment and also requires investment in our water treatment plants and our water reclamation plants to be able to support that investment. So that's what we have to just keep working through. That's the proposal at the top that we were proposing in terms of a phasing in of the changes to new customer contributions, and we're going to do further engagement that's starting this week with the development community, as well as we've established customer advisory groups or CAGs, and we'll be consulting with those CAGs as well about what's reasonable here in terms of development community costs and general customer costs, and how do we strike that balance? How do we phase it in? What's fair? What's reasonable? Et cetera, et cetera. Can we go to the next one, please? Inflation. So inflation's biting. We get that. I listen to the radio every morning, and it's always talking about inflation. The story this morning was that Sydney house prices are going up at the moment after coming off 9%. That maybe the RBA decides to further ratchet up interest rates tomorrow. Now, our prices have fallen 10% compared to inflation since 2018. That's something that cannot be sustained in our business and in our region. The last price increase for Coliban customers was in 2015. And you think about everything else in your life and what's happened to everything else in your life since 2015 in terms of costs. actual costs have exceeded inflation for most of that time. Now we have, we've pushed our model pretty hard. We've demonstrated through the OPEX review that what we're proposing is in large part accepted as reasonable. Chemical costs, these ABS stats, 52% up. Anyone who's involved in any civil and construction works knows how that's been ratcheting up. 16% in 2 years. Electricity costs are going up. Obviously, that's gas and electricity. That's on the third radio report every morning. So that's we get that that's happening, and we're not immune from those things. We've been asked by the ESC to see what we can do to minimise the pass-through of inflation to customers, and we'll absolutely leave no stone unturned to see if there's somewhere we can provide some kind of justification for not passing through the full inflation figure. But I've got to say, at this point, that's looking very challenging for us to achieve that. The next one, please. We care a lot about what our customers think of us. This is the latest Essential Services Commission robocall survey results. We've gone up relative to our peers in recent times in terms of the value for money figure, and also our overall trust figure. So we're working hard to continue to demonstrate the value we provide to the community and to win that trust. That's just off the hot off the press about a week ago. Next one, please. So this is the summary, and sorry, Kate and Marcus, I've rabbited on a bit, but I think there's been a bit in our submission that we've needed to talk to. So we're addressing those major challenges of climate growth, ageing assets and customer growth. We're doubling support for customers experiencing vulnerability. We'll not leave anyone behind. There is no qualification for people accessing our programs. We're proposing a modest price increase above inflation. We get that inflation's biting, but we want to avoid future price volatility. And we're phasing in those new customer contributions to ensure developers do pay their fair share and are not cross-subsidised by existing customers. Now, and I said at the outset, we recognise we've got some more work to do on that, and I expect that through the engagement that'll continue to occur, there'll be changes. So that's kind of the summary, Kate and Marcus. So happy to hand it back. Yes, go for it.
Q&A. I'm told I need to speak up, so hopefully everyone online can hear me through the speaker here. I'm going to open up a Q&A session now. I know this was to run for an hour and we've got a few minutes left, but if everybody's got a bit of flexibility with their time frames, I think this is the whole value of being here today, to hear directly from stakeholders. So let's just see how many areas of feedback or concern or questions we have, and we can take it as it goes. Lucy, did you want to give some some instructions about in the room facilitation versus online, and if anyone online can't hear at any point or it has their hand up and no one's seeing it from the team's perspective, just pop something in the chat, and there's people monitoring that so we can get to you as well. So maybe Lucy, you can give some instructions and go from there.
Yep. I will leave this here just momentarily, but this is the primary speaker that we're using today. So we're also using this speaker, which uses the sound system in the room, and that makes it easier for this machine to pick it up and share it with the people online. You'll notice I'm speaking really closely to it, so we'll pass this around as the primary way of speaking, and that'll ensure that your voice is picked up in this room, up on this speaker. You're not speaking and projecting for everyone else in the room. You're actually speaking and projecting so that people online can hear you really clearly. And they will, when they're speaking, you'll hear them very, very clearly out of this machine.
So with that there, pass that to you. Thank you. So how we go. Thanks, Lucy. So hopefully everyone online can hear. And can I just say thank you very much, Damien, for the presentation as well, in terms of just comprehensively stepping us through your pricing submission and a bit of a gauge, I guess, on the responses Coliban will provide to the Commission as a result of that draft decision. So thanks very much for taking the time to do that. I imagine there are a couple of areas of particular interest that were flagged both by Marcus and yourself, probably that has a bit of stakeholder interest either online or in the room. So I'm going to open it up now with just a reminder that this is being recorded, so any comment or statement you make or question you ask will be recorded. please online, use your chat function, put your hand up, and I've got a team here to tell me if that happens, so we can easily make sure everybody gets the opportunity to engage if they'd like to. So let me open it up now. I'd just like to raise any other queries, comments, feedback in terms of the areas particularly that you raised, Amy, but anything else just to kick us off for a Q&A session, just to get the discussion going. Yes, I'll hand this over to you, and it'd be great if you could tell your say your name, where you're from, so that we can.
I'm GS. I'm community, and just want to make a couple of points for the NCC extension. So we talk about ageing assets and a high capital expenditure, and making sure that the existing relevant clients are shifting information. But the current sector also has two responsibilities. One, to the end to sense basis to their businesses is what is the platform of cost rather than the headline number, and how is that represented? And when it's multiplied over the amount of work that will be done through the sector over the 5-year period, that's a significant. The other one is a really important philosophical point to say that the development community represents future communities. It represents future clients of Coliban. It represents people who will pay for a service, a connection service, within the purchase of a block or a house that is finished. And they deserve the opportunity of being represented in these discussions and having the parity in other process. So that's what the development community actually does. It represents future generations or future users or clients or customers of Coliban's. And they don't necessarily have a voice in the process. And the development community represents the price parity for them on what is a connection. The other piece of thinking that could be done is to say the development community is intelligent, sophisticated and quite articulate. It works with concepts like development contribution plans all the time. It understands broad infrastructure issues, it understands the detailed numbers, and its conversation or engagement should be at that level. So I agree, the engagement that Coliban did was best practice. I thought it was to be celebrated amongst the community. But the development sector wasn't in those discussions. And what it received was a series of engagements with information, but not a lot of detail, broad information about larger infrastructure costs, but not a lot of breakdown in detail. So it's been unable to really inform its decision-making or response to the survey style of closed questioning that are received over time around the detail or the level of information that represents the fiduciary duty that those entities have in their businesses and the responsibility they bear to future communities and clients. So the engagement did occur. There was a disparity between the engagement the development sector received and the other engagement processes that were adopted by Coliban, I think. And the development sector certainly expected a lot more detail and analysis and opportunity to discuss and understand. So we've received late Friday some more information, and there's some question and survey process going on again. But personally, I've read all that information and I'm not any further informed about the detail enough to make comment about the options or choices or selections that are provided as being available. So it goes to the point of what is the level of sophistication or detail a sector needs to ensure that the cost balance between existing clients and new development, when you've got ageing assets, large capital works programs, is actually new growth. Someone should be able to measure and observe and deal with it. And our sector is intelligent enough to do that someday too. So I might make some further comments later, but at this point I'll pass on.
Thanks very much, Leanne. Did everybody online hear that okay?
They didn't hear the mic until I moved this. So I think we're back to using this and moving this around the room. I'm not sure that the mic's adding anything to
Okay. Well, I'll give you that.
Do you want me to take that back there? Otherwise, I actually might just speak into it and then pass actually the baton to you, Damien, if that's all right. Hopefully online everyone can hear me. It feels a bit odd hovering over a microphone like this. But thanks very much for your feedback on NCCs, which, as you would have seen, there's been a fair bit of emphasis on that in the draft decision from the Commission as well. So we're actively seeking feedback and further information from the business on that particular aspect as well. Damien, given we're talking about future communities as opposed to current communities, and I think that's probably you talk about that a lot in terms of what your business does in terms of a community service. Sounds like there's a bit of an appetite, and you've already shown that, to engage further with the developer community, but it sounds like there's a little bit more to go in terms of having the right sort of dialogue and the right sort of sophistication in terms of what the developer are looking for. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of give a bit of a segue to what next in terms of engagement with the developers on that particular aspect, and I'll leave it with you for a minute.
Yeah, no, look, thanks, Kate, and thanks, Damien. Well articulated. I've made notes of that. I think it's really what I'm hearing is looking for the detail underpinning the headline. So, no, point well made. In terms of the engagement that's happening in the coming week or so, I might just hand to Jarrah and potentially Lauren, if you decide who's best positioned to get into some of the detail as to how you're proposing to engage, and then I think we should test whether there's a sense whether that's going to hit the mark. Talking to the spaceship there.
Cool. So some of the things we'll be engaging on is the phasing in of the increased new customer contributions, and we'll be doing that with general customers as well as with developers. We'll also be exploring and discussing the difference between infill and greenfield areas, and the prospect for differentials in terms of NCCs in relation to that. And we'll also be looking at an array of different options, even as it relates to utilising the NCF model instead of the AIC model. We've got some preliminary numbers, and we'll be exploring, I suppose, some different options around that regarding both the AIC and the NCF model. So those are the three areas in particular.
And sorry, Jared, if I can just lean in slightly. Without the detail, it's very hard to respond to that without the background numbers and without a process where there's a digestion and a conversation, and that takes time. And I look at 1 July and I wonder how that occurs between now and then. So we can respond indicatively to preferred models, but without the cost base, the cost differential, and the different application of those models being clearly understood, it's very hard to say yes or no in a closed survey question to that. So that's a concern in that time frame about how to engage and overcome that issue.
I wouldn't mind, Kate, if there's anyone else from the development community. We're certainly aware of your concerns, Damien, and they've been well articulated. I've also received other feedback over the time that there was a level of comfort with a fair bit of what was proposed. So I think, if any other voices want to come into it, we welcome those and happy to hear those, whether that's now or through the process.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Andrea Tompkinson, and I'm not a developer, but development consultant. So our views on it are more about, are not related to any one specific parcel of land, but in general, the other thing is I'm chair of the Northern Chapter of the UDIA. So that's a group of developers who get together once a month, and we try and make sure that we're all on the same page with issues that affect us, including Coliban, and we collectively made a submission to the pricing submission. And our views are pretty much similar to Damien's views, but what we find is that we don't have an understanding of how the NCCs are arrived at, what is included in those contributions. Are rising mains included? Is it about, is it as part of the contribution to upgrade existing facilities? Is it just about pipes? Does it impact just the land in question or land further out in the catchment, all those sorts of things? We don't have an understanding of what is actually included in an NCC, because it could include everything, but if it doesn't, then we're left in a situation of other costs as well that come on top of that. So from a developer consultant, it's important for us to be able to tell our clients what their costings are when we do a detailed cost estimate of roads, services, sewers, planning, construction, all of that. So knowing the detail of what is and isn't included is really important. And we did feel collectively that, like Damien said, the consultation with the community was really good. And even in the presentation, there were lots of photos of the community consulting. With the industry, it was not the same level of consultation. It was PowerPoint presentations that showed philosophically these are the options. And the philosophical options are, it's hard to choose one when you don't know on the ground how those options are actually going to work. I mean, it has to be financially viable to keep housing affordable and construction viable and affordable as well, in order for us to make a decision about which model or which way of approaching things will work. That's my 10 cents.
There's certainly, Kate, there's some things that we did understand were relatively clear, which is a postage stamp approach to NCCs, as I understood it. We hear the questions about infill versus greenfields. We think definitionally that's very difficult to practically implement. There may be something that we did discuss with Marcus the other day about, is there a 4 lots and less kind of approach relative to other, which is obviously the larger development parcels. So yeah, everything's on the table. I get the points that are being made, and I get the point about affordability for community, and we respect the important role that the development community plays to underpin growth. But I also come back to we've got 30% of Coliban Water customers, 58% in Rochester, something like 30% or more in Echuca that are already eligible for concessions. So we've got to make sure that those customers aren't unduly cross-subsidising the new work as well. So we'll just keep, as long as we can keep working that through, I'm sure we can find a landing.
Thanks for your question, Andrew, and the response. I mean, it sounds like the nature of the engagement and what's to come in a very short time frame, yes, but an appetite to absolutely engage, and the detail underpinning the approach is really what I've heard from both stakeholders so far. David, you popped your hand up. David Heaps, would you like to come and ask a question or get some feedback as well?
Yep, okay. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Damien. First of all, I have to declare my interests, I suppose. I was an employee of the Essential Services Commission up until about 7 years ago. I've been doing some work for a company called AIFA, who works in the water industry space, and part of their work has been giving some advice to MG estates. So take my bias for what it is, but I can assure you that my purpose of being here today is to actually defend the current state of the NCC model that the ESC has been using, partly because I invested quite a bit of time when I was at the Commission into that framework. Just two key points, I suppose. The first one is I haven't heard any justification either in your submission or today for why did you propose a different average incremental cost model. To me, from what I can see in the model, because there's been no explanation of it, but from what I can see is that it ignores any residual value at the end of the planning period. It also ignores any net revenue streams that you're getting from those new customers. And I think, Damien, in your slide, I saw that poor assets were a function of our business. With new assets from new customers, you're getting something that's going to be very low operating cost for the next 20 odd years, after the guarantee period. So in many ways, those new customers are contributing to your renewal of your asset base. Yet the assets are performing extremely well. The other point I'd make is that what we've been missing in this whole discussion is we're talking about standard NCCs, and you know, Robinson Crusoe in the water industry here, but it seems as though standard NCCs have taken over as the default position. And I know when I go to your negotiating framework on your website, you talk about the fact that negotiated NCCs are not available to the subdivision industry. That's in direct contrast to what the ESC guidance material says, because it talks about standard NCCs or negotiated NCCs. Even in the case of where you do acknowledge a negotiated NCC, it's in addition that you say that's going to be added on to the standard NCC. Once again, in total contrast to what the Commission is proposing. So I think in many ways the Commission has been lenient on you, or the language in the draft decision has been lenient. I would have been much more straightforward saying that it doesn't meet the requirements in the guidance paper. I'd support that point about if you've got the information to have a meaningful negotiation with the industry in the next couple of weeks, then why haven't you been disclosing that? Disclosed the justification for the model. So that'd be my two questions, I suppose.
Well, I don't think there's anything new in what you said, David, other than giving Kate and Marcus some advice. I've responded to Damien, who you're working for. That's responded. Andrew has reinforced the point. So we've said we're going to engage, and at the end of the day, we'll do the work to understand, we'll share the detailed costing, and it'll be what it'll be. And when there's no intention of any smoke and mirrors here. So, and the other bit about the low operational costs, if you look at that Bendigo Valley, a lot of the existing infill areas would be able to be managed through gravity in large part on the sewer side. New development, there's sewer pump station after sewer pump station, high energy costs, high operational costs. So it's not quite as simple as you described.
Yeah, look, I didn't mean to oversimplify, but if those numbers are on the table, then it would be open to Damien and his colleagues to actually scrutinise those. And I guess from an Essential Services Commission point of view, as government requires them to be a light-handed regulator, they haven't got the resources to go through your material in detail. So relying on the development industry to be your criticiser or your reviewer actually helps the Commission. So,
well, to be fair as well to existing customers, we've got to be a little bit mindful there, because Marcus and the team have sent a lot of consultants who put us through the ringer, and all of our OPEX and CAPEX has withstood all the scrutiny that's been applied, with the exception of less than 1%. So that's all withstood scrutiny. And I think we also have to recognise, with all due respect to the development community, that there is a level of interest here which, of course, any saving on an NCC is straight to the bottom line for a developer. So I just have to call that out. The reality is that if well, let's have a proper conversation then.
You just can't wait. That is so with inflation and everything else going up, that's straight off the bottom.
Can I just, can everyone on here maybe? I'm just going to give the microphone a go, and if you would just say your name and where you're from.
Yep. I'll come around the line. Yeah. My name's Julian Perez. I'm from Bellwood Properties. So I mean, I don't, I'll just let that that I don't agree with that comment that you just made. But at the development industry also, what we don't understand, we've been told that there are capital costs inside the NCC. We've been asking that for probably several years now. And so what we've been paying, over the decades, what we see is that we're probably the investment that should have been happening over all those years, we're probably paying for that now, because that investment hasn't been there, and now we're in catch-up mode. So that's one of the points. And also, just the fact that our new customers, like you put on there your averages, that the percentage increase is about, I think it's about 11% for existing customers. And but you're asking the development industry, I think that's about 100% increase in the development cost of that NCC. So they're just a couple of things that, and I don't want to go on again about it, but just that we just don't have the proper information to make the proper decisions about the cost increases, and we just don't think that's been articulated well enough. So.
Look, I totally accept that. So what I'm hearing, I know we're repeating, but we've got to get the numbers on the table to get sufficient clarity so we can all say, okay, there it is. So I acknowledge that. And just to be clear, the proposed approach isn't about seeing the development community as a means to fund other unrelated capital, and we can say that with a hand on our heart, and we want to be able to produce the numbers that will demonstrate that to you. So more than happy. This is a valuable, it's a valuable conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Multitasker. Hopefully everybody online could hear that. Thanks, Julian, for your question and for your response as well, Damien. Look, sounds like you're getting some clarity about the lens in which the business is approaching NCCs and more detail about the engagement and the underlying information that's been sought by the developer community. So it sounds like there's some discussions to be had. It's a very short period of time. The Commission is also going through a process of asking the business to justify their approach. So there's a range of measures that are happening in a very short time frame, but I'm sure that that's provided hopefully a good foundation on which the business can now engage with the developer community on those particular aspects that have been raised today, Damien. So I wonder, given the time, it is 2:20, I'm told there's no hands up or chats online, team, no, all good. If we put NCC to one side, unless there's any other aspects anyone wanted to raise in relation to NCC.
There's one comment about community consultation from Samantha Hughes.
Yep, so we can unmute you, Samantha, if you are like to speak to that. Yep, you're unmuted.
Yeah, hi. Look, I just wanted to put in a comment. I just wanted to thank again the Commission and Coliban for giving so much space to community consultation. Someone who is on the community panel, and not only did it give me an insight into how a water board works, it also increased trust, I think, between the community and these larger institutions, and including the Commission in being invited into a space like this today. And I feel that that's incredibly important. I feel like the more community consultation that can happen in these kinds of areas, trust is has been so degraded between major institutions and the public, including water authorities and other energy providers, that I just want to reiterate how important that was and how important I feel like it is across the board for that to continue to happen, because certainly my trust has been uplifted enormously, and I speak to people, and the more we speak to people, the more the community starts to regain trust in these in things like the Essential Services Commission, in our water authorities, in our major providers. And I just wanted to put that in as so that everybody can hear that and take it in and take it on board. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Samantha. Just in terms of, while I've got you there, if we're moving away from NCC, you've talked a little bit about the engagement by Coliban Water. Is there any other aspects of our draft decision on Coliban Water's pricing submission, in particular in terms of the proposed price increases and the pathway for that? Just wanted to give you an opportunity if there's anything else from a water customer's perspective you'd like to raise for us today.
Oh, Samantha, you're on mute.
We're just going to unmute you, Samantha. Oh, no, you're going to do it? Yeah,
I think what Coliban has proposed is actually incredibly brave in terms of the current financial environment in relation to customers and raising prices. But I am very glad that they've been very brave. I think completely the community panel came away with the sense that we need to invest in the infrastructure and the works now for the generations in the future. And I speak as someone who lives with disability, and is in a single earning household. I feel like it's a difficult landscape, but we all need to step up, and that was overwhelmingly the feeling that we had. And I think when that's explained to the community knows that if they have trust in the processes that bring these prices about and the people who are working behind the scenes, as well as the institutions themselves, I think there's more of a sense of giving to the community. I think people want to give to the community and want to stabilise our communities and want to feel stability and security in our institutions and our service boards. So, I'm very grateful to the Commission for the work that's been done to make sure that the public is well informed and our interests are looked after in relation to services in that way. So, no, nothing really to add. I'm just being enthusiastic and saying hooray. Thank you.
good. Thanks very much, Samantha. The mention of trust is always music. Building trust is always music to my ears. So thanks very much for your feedback. I wonder, I haven't seen any other hands up, but I was actually going to come to you, Rodney, if that's all right. Yes, we were probably just about to raise my hand to talk to you, and it looks like you're about to do the same to me as well. Would you like to come down the front and make any other comment from your perspective? Yep. Thanks very much.
A bit of a comment. So hopefully it's not useful, but it was really interesting hearing from Damon at UDIA in terms of our relationship and support for Coliban. We want you as well in trying to figure out what the technical nature it is for us as a First Nations group in becoming familial with Coliban and the industry and its business has been no end of improvement for us in terms of technical intelligence. And I'll disclaim that and say we're not an expert in this, but to see what sits behind the faucet when you flick the tap on and water comes out, it's a complex and an amazing thing. But as we'd be aware as Central Victorians, that there was a form of development in Central Victoria and very old infrastructure, very quick, was brought in here, and I think over the last couple of 100 years we've done our best. I think in as way as Jar Jar Wurrung describes it, a very fragile catchment, and I think we've seen a couple of really good floods, and hopefully there's more floods that don't hurt us but are opportunistic sensibly for us. What we have seen in working with the board and others is the improvement in emotional intelligence, and I think that's really important. It was interesting to hear you say how gentle maybe the Commission has been. We would commend the Commission in doing that, because has been touched on. I think what we're trying to do here as a collective in supporting Coliban is quite ambitious, and something that we press really strongly is that it's incumbent on us in these moments that we have to ensure with the infrastructure we've got that future generations are in a much better position than us. And if that means that we have to wear the financial implications because of that, I would say we have to do that. And at the same time, be caring and cautious about those that are hurt by, the adventure that we take in the leadership in this area. So, that's for Jar Jar Wurrung. I think, we've learned a bit more about what's going on. Hopefully we've been useful in supporting others. Damien know well, like, you know, we've been an imposition in development in Central Victoria, and we don't necessarily want that. We want, you know, the economy and everything to be vibrant and still to go forward. And I think for our utility here, it is like our utility. It's personal. It's something customers in all forms own. Whereas we look at the other utilities sort of in the state, and we have little or no control really over that. So that's all I wanted to add, Kate. Hopefully, is that what you wanted me to say?
No, I'm wanting you to say whatever you'd like to give feedback on, but thank you very much, Rodney, for sharing that with us. And absolutely, I think the reflections on engagement by the business with the deliberative panel and with a range of community members and perspectives, we have reflected and commended the business for taking those steps. Today, there's a range of different stakeholders here, which just shows the fit for purpose nature for engagement, I guess, is something that the business needs to adapt to, and it sounds like you will respond to that as well, Damien. So we'll leave that one there unless there's anything else you wanted to add.
And I think, look, just in terms of our work with the development community, we want to make a landing. We want to make a landing in the time frame. Unfortunately, we're going to need to make a landing in the time frame. So we'll throw everything at it. We'll be absolutely transparent in doing that. If everyone's unhappy at the end of it, then we've probably landed in the right place. But we'll have to be a bit of give and take in this, I think. You know, we think that there is some cross subsidy in the existing model. The onus is on us to work through and describe that and provide that to a sense where you can either accept or further challenge that, and then ultimately, yeah, we need to make a landing on it. So that's what we're committed to. So I'll be making myself available. The team's making themselves available through the engagement, and yeah, we just have to find a way through. And we do respect the role. And sorry, Julian, I was a bit fired up with David's comments, so I retract my bottom line comment. But clearly, that's what we want to make sure is that the right parties are bearing the right costs from a justifiable standpoint.
Thanks very much, David. I think I had a hand up, but that might have gone down. All good. I'm just conscious of the time. It's 2:30, but it's always valuable to hear directly from stakeholders, so I don't want to cut anyone short. But with that in mind, team, anyone online have a chat that I need to read out, or a question or a hand raised?
Hannah Cook's just said great presentation and chat, so that's all that's come
Just a
through.
reflection. Yep. Thank you for that reflection, Hannah. If there's no other hands up or comments online, team, would it be open to me to start to ask for last questions and close the session? So in the room, if there's nothing online in the room, if anyone wanted to add anything in terms of reflections, comments, careers, now's your opportunity. We have had a very good conversation. A robust conversation is always a good one from my perspective. There is one last hand. Yep.
Sorry, my name's Jenny. I'm from the Advertiser.
Jenny, did you want to come and sit and talk into this? It's Jenny.
Really?
No.
Please.
They won't hear online if you don't.
Yeah, hi. Not being very well versed in this on this issue, I just wanted to ask for a very simple sort of breakdown. My understanding is that there's aged infrastructure that needs replacing, improvements made on environmental grounds, but it's been neglected for quite a while. So I was just wondering if you can give a very simple sort of succinct description of that and why it's been neglected. Like, why is it coming to this point now? And that at such a difficult time, average people are going to have to be paying more on their bills. And then after these increases have been, or these improvements have been implemented, and the 5 year, is there a vision ahead? Will this potentially, all need to be done again, or what's going to happen? Will it flatline then?
Yeah, no, look, great questions. So what we would say, I wouldn't use the term neglect. The term that we've used and described in our submission is that capital investment has been deferred as long as possible. And that was in pursuit of keeping bills affordable for customers. You saw that prices have actually been going down. Water bills have been going down for quite a while.
Once you add the inflation in, it sort of doesn't seem that way, obviously.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
so that's what we need to navigate. So if you think about, just to put some context around household bills, if you think about rates, energy bills, telecommunication bills, running a vehicle costs $200 a week. That's an old figure. It's probably $300 a week. I've only got old figures in my head from energy costs, but they are some of the bigger utility bills in a household. Water, what we're proposing in terms of the price rise works out to be, I think it's about $2.50 a week. Is how it works out, inclusive of inflation. Correct. About $2.50 a week is the average customer bill increase. And so we think that that's modest. We think that that strikes the right balance between current generations and future generations. So the capital investment's been deferred as long as possible. Bills have been kept low as long as possible. Now we need that modest increase in bills to fund the assets that we really need. Now, in terms of what the future brings, there will be a cost to adapting to climate change. And we will continue to experience that in every aspect of our lives. So beyond 2028, of course, we'll need to have a look at what the climate's doing. But these are in large part long life assets. So a lot of what we'll be investing in will have 20, 30, in some case, underground pipes might have an 80-year lifespan. So this isn't a trajectory that goes forever and ever, but it is a correction that's required so that we can meet contemporary community expectations, our service obligations, environmental protection, our public health obligations. They're the things that are front of mind for us. So we think this is very modest and manageable. And I know we've mentioned it, but we have a $570,000 per annum program, which is specifically designed to support customers experiencing vulnerability. All people need to do, ring Coliban Water and talk through their particular case, and we'll see how we can support them so that no one's left behind. And that program is actually a program that's fully funded in this proposal, but there's other non-monetary mechanisms of payment plans and other things we can do to assist people getting onto direct debit so they can have regular money debited against their water bill rather than waiting for that quarterly bill, if that helps manage customer household cash flows a bit more readily. So these are all the things that are top of mind for us.
How soon do you think the monthly billing might be implemented?
Oh, that's probably something that probably still is a couple of years away because we've got a lot of back of house digital investment to do that, but we've done stage 1 of that investment. And then we've got effectively a stage 2 and 3 of that investment. And we need to complete the digital meter rollout in Bendigo, which is happening over the next 18 months to 2 years. And that's been impacted by supply chain with microchip availability and things I won't bore you with. But
sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank
thanks for
you.
your interest. Cheers.
Thanks, Jenny. Always good to talk about customer impacts and the hardship program for those who might be experiencing vulnerability in the community as well, Damien. So thanks for that response. I'm sure Jenny will touch base if there's any other detail that's needed. All good. Nothing else online, team? Just Marcus, team, anything else I needed to cover before closing off? And no other hands in the room. Well, thanks for everybody's flexibility and patience because we've taken a little bit more time from everybody than we said we would, but that's been a very useful discussion from my perspective. I really value hearing directly from stakeholders. It's really important as a decision maker that I hear the range of views around a table, and it sounds like there's a bit of work to do between some of the stakeholders in the business. But thank you very much for everybody's time today. Look, between now and the 12th of May, there is still the opportunity to make a written submission. I know many of you around the table or online have already done that. The team have put those details on the slide, and please contact the team at that email address if there's anything else you wanted to give feedback or touch base on. On behalf of all my commission staff, thank you for all of the arrangements you've made to be here today in person. It's been great to come up to Bendigo and see everybody in a room together and have everyone online as well. Thank you for joining us today. I know the team will be looking forward to hearing further feedback from everybody. Thank you for your time, and I think on that note, I'm going to close the meeting. So thank you to everybody online and thank you to everybody in the room. Thanks very much.